News out of the UK: a rail worker who was assaulted by an individual who apparently had coronavirus has passed away as a result of that. Let me give you some of the details. Uh, the woman's name is Belly Mujinga. She was working with a colleague when a member of the public assaulted them, spat and coughed over them, and said that he had the novel coronavirus, according to the Transport Salaried Staffs Association. That's the union for those UK rail workers. She died on April 5th, 14 days after she was assaulted at the Victoria station. She leaves behind an 11-year-old daughter and a husband who last saw her when she was taken away by ambulance. So, just briefly, obviously, absolutely horrendous. We've seen cases of this before. I saw a video of a supermarket where a guy who had been yelling at people who work there wiped his nose on one of their shirts. Like, people who don't take this seriously think that it's a joke and then do things that can potentially kill someone. This individual did die. It is going to get worse in another way in just a second, but Jordan, I want to give you an opportunity to chime in.
This is heartbreaking. This is someone who should have had, way more protections, way more protective equipment. Possibly, it's tough with when you have infrastructure like railways. That there needs to be some limited service, but absolutely should have been protected. Totally preventable. And what an I don't know. Actually, I can't say that word, but what a jerk for the person who just absolute psychopath. That ultimately took someone else's life because of just negligence and just absolute disregard for someone else's life. Terrible. I mean, this is just, for her and her union and her coworkers and everyone around the world. I mean, the workers of the world need to unite because this is just totally preventable.
Exactly. Yeah, the individual who like has been fed lies about how lethal this thing is, and so is joking, spitting and coughing, and like you might have in your trips out. I'm talking to the audience. You might have come across people like this. Think it's funny to joke about and all of that. It's like a person has been convinced that knives aren't dangerous, and so just goes around like waving a knife because like, hey, everyone on news who wears ties and suits, they tell me that knives aren't actually that dangerous, that being stabbed actually isn't as fatal as, the UN tells me. That's like what we're dealing with here. And so this individual died. But while the person who spat on them is obviously to blame here, not the only person to blame. As Jordan alluded to, this is another case where an employee was mistreated by their workplace and should have been protected but wasn't. So we have a statement from the union saying, Belly and her colleague begged to be let to work from inside the building with a protective barrier between them and the public for the rest of that day. Management said they needed people working outside and sent them back out onto the concourse for the rest of their shift. Both women went back outside and completed their shift, but they had no personal protective equipment. Belly in particular had underlying respiratory conditions that made her more vulnerable to the coronavirus, and the union is saying that the workplace was fully aware of that and still forced them to go out and work. And this reminds me of the stories we've been talking about the meatpacking plants, of people being forced to work at threat of losing their job, being put into conditions where they were working, elbow to elbow with other people, no personal protective equipment. At one particular Tyson plant, over 1,000 people got coronavirus at one plant. And it's because people didn't take it seriously. And the most important people who are not taking it seriously are those who control the destinies of these workers. It's a problem in the UK, and it's a problem here in the US as well.
Yeah, there's capitalists and business owners typically do not care about the health and safety of workers because, at the end of the day, they're disposable. They're just cogs in a machine for the business owners and the investors to get rich. Their lives are disposable. They're replaceable. And this is an example of that, pretty modest requests for personal safety were ignored. And now someone is dead as a result of it. So again, just organize. They were organized, but demand more, demand better. Always supportive of strikes in this effort. Just don't put yourself in an unsafe situation. But on top of that, and I realize this is a different situation because it's the UK, but especially here, the government has to step in to fill the void. Mm-hmm. And because corporate influence and capitalist influence has such a grip on American politics, that's one of the roadblocks. That's one of the impediments to actually getting relief.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, people on both parties in Congress are ultimately standing to get richer. Their investments are at stake. We saw insider trading at the onset of this crisis. It's truly a grim situation where human suffering is seen as an opportunity for profit.
100%. And, there's a great example of that. In Texas right now, there's that salon owner who just opened the salon even though they weren't supposed to, and that just doing that made them a right-wing hero for the rest of their life. Like Ted Cruz went and got his haircut there. They're talking about it on Fox News constantly. They talked about it way more than the Arbery case. Another story out of Texas is one restaurant group there in reopening messaged its workers and said, you are not to wear masks, presumably because it sends the wrong signal about how safe it is there. That was not a huge story on Fox, but that is like a decision to try to maximize profit, and I think a wrong one. I don't think it will work, knowing that it puts your workers at risk of getting sick and dying. And that's just the norm. Like across the country, you are going to have to hope, once the local and the state ordinances pass, you're going to have to hope that the person who signs your paycheck takes it seriously. Because if they don't, you could lose your job, you could lose your home or your apartment, you could also lose your life. That's a system that we've set up. And the people in charge aren't going to challenge it.
Do they wear hats or hair masks if they're in the kitchen?
I don't know.
I'm just saying, if that's, I would argue that that's a responsible thing to do. So if you're taking that step but not a mask, there's just some cognitive dissonance happening there that ultimately is because of what you talked about earlier, the right-wing influence.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.